When it comes to finding the very best location to build your first base in Nightingale isn't quite as straightforward as it is compared to other survival games, as Nightingale offers a very different, rather refreshing, unique realm system. Not only that, it grants us complete freedom to build bases wherever we want, inside dungeons, caves, pretty much anywhere. But when you're very first starting out, where should you build your first base of operation? Hello and welcome, I'm Sinkiller, and we're going to do a deep dive. I'll give you all the information you need to know so that you can pick the very best place to build your first base, as Nightingale does offer definitely some punishment for picking the wrong place to start with, and the choice is going to be determined by understanding everything we're about to go through. So let's jump into it. For those that are new to the scene, Nightingale is a breathtaking, open-world fantasy survival game set amongst a backdrop of steampunk and Victorian elegance. Whether you're going at it solo or teaming up with up to 5 friends, you'll be hopping through between procedurally generated realms of the Fey Wilds, all in pursuit of finding a way back to the human realm and the illustrious city of Nightingale. Right on the onset of starting a new game, you'll be faced with your first critical decision. You'll have to choose where to build your base of operation. You can think of this as like your home realm, your sanctuary, a place where you stack ingots and where you craft legendary weapons. And in Nightingale, we call this home realm the Abeyance realm. Going to be the realm where a majority of people set up their main bases. And it's important to understand that when you start off, you will get to pick between the 3 different biomes, and then you'll basically have to build your first base. You'll be instructed to build an estate cairn, but we'll just call it an estate. Now, the estate is super important because you can set this to your respite. And this means that you can quick travel to this place or to your home base from any realm that you're in. And currently, this is the only way to do any kind of quick travel. So the general process is you find a location that you like in your advanced realm. We'll have some pointers on whereabouts you should do that a bit later. And then you would build your estate, you would set that to your respite, and then you can quick travel to that point. And more importantly, when you do die, excluding a few other bit later mid-game things, you will spawn at your estate. But simply when you die, you will respawn at your estate. So this is going to be like your command center, your place that you will go back to quite often. Now, technically, you don't have to build your home base in an advanced realm, but it's definitely the recommendation I will give. And we'll go through the various reasons why. However, you do have complete freedom, but just know that if you build an estate in an advanced realm, that is going to be your place you can quick travel to. So my understanding is you will be able to change your home base. You can pack up and move to another advanced realm or even to any other realm that you want, but you will have to deconstruct your estate. And that's why it's so important. It's going to be a point where you do all your crafting and building, your storage, your rest, your respite, your strategic planning, the whole shabozzle. But there's absolutely nothing stopping you from building bases in every single realm. But keep in mind, if you do build anything that's not in an advanced realm and you have the realm set to public, anyone who joins will be able to mess with anything that you do. But I'll cover the multiplayer side of things soon. In early access, there'll be 3 distinct biomes to choose from. Your green, dense, luscious forest biome, your dry, deadly, barren desert biome, and your poisonous, misty, and unforgiving swamp biome. Each of these biomes having its own set of unique creatures and environmental challenges, its own positive and negative, and of course, some variation in resources that you can gather throughout the tutorial, where you'll get an introduction to all of the core mechanics, including gathering resources, crafting, and get a taste and feel for the different environments. And you'll also be introduced to Puck. Puck is like your sensei, your narrator and guide. It will help and walk you through the tutorial and throughout the rest of the game. Upon setting your eyes on Puck, he will introduce you to your very first portal. And along with that, the realm card machine, where you will be prompted to combine a biome card, in this case it will be a forest card, and then a major card. Now, major cards are used to set the difficulty level and special conditions of the realm you're entering. They influence the type of encounters and challenges you'll face, potentially making a realm more difficult, but also more rewarding. Can have effects like increase the level of enemies, introduce specific environmental challenges, increase realms with particular themes, or increase resource availability. And just in case, the biome card determines your environment, what the landscape will look like, and what some of the resources and creatures might be. So in this case, we're prompted to put in the forest biome, and then the major card is a byway card. These are pretty much just your tutorial realms, very small, and just some stepping stones into the more major realms. And this will take us to our very first forest realm. Now, the forest abeyance realm is by far the easiest realm to build your first base in. you'll come across many creatures. They might be aggressive, but they're very easy to kill, even at the low level, ranging from things like wolves and the fera swine, which are the pigs, which are all quite aggressive. So when you do pass them, they will attack you. But then you'll also find stacks of passive creatures, mainly the heart deer, and all these creatures are great for farming meat, hide, and bones, which you'll need a lot of those to craft some of your clothing materials. Now, the forest biome is going to be perfect for people that are new to survival games, want to get a good introduction and feel to Nightingale, as it does also contain a lot of the base materials that you need to progress up to early to mid game, being stacked with so much wood, which is heavily required for upgrading most of your gear, crafting, and building. It has plenty of stone, a fundamental resource for crafting tools, building structures, creating pathways or defenses. Iron ore, this is an important one, oftenly used for crafting more durable tools, weapons, and armor. You'll use a lot of ore to craft into ingots, and then ingots are used in so many different things. You'll find lots of quartz, which can be refined into glass, and tin, which can be refined into ingots. You'll have plenty of creatures to harvest as well, and it really sets the basis for an easy to navigate and plentiful realm to start in. Now, the only trouble I had in the forest to banter realm was I was constantly getting stuck on cliffs. I did find kind of the climbing mechanic a bit clunky for me. However, you do get access to climbing picks very early on, which will definitely help you navigate this terrain. Alternatively, you can switch into your third person mode, which makes it a bit easier to traverse the cliffs and rocky surfaces. But the forest realm definitely has more mountains and rocks or rocky terrain compared to, say, the desert and swamp realms. Now, moving on to the weather conditions, forest biome offers probably the least lethal and worrisome environmental conditions, and that is the hail. Now, hail will deal damage and cause you to be wet, having an effect on your stamina, and it can also affect many other objects if they're not protected by some sort of shelter. For instance, if you lay a bed down and it's hailing or raining, you won't be able to sleep in it because it's considered soggy. Same as something like a fire. You won't obviously be able to have a fire going if it isn't sheltered from the hail or rain. Now, it's very easy to protect yourself from the hail because you will get access to an umbrella quite early on. Alternatively, just building any kind of makeshift structure will protect you from a lot of the elements. You'll find the hail probably the least annoying out of all the different environmental conditions that you come across. Another reason that the forest realm is so good for being your first biome to build your base in is because of these points of interest called sites of power. Now, these sites of power are critical to your progression, and all they are locations that can be caves, dungeons, points of interest that you will visit where you'll conquer enemies, puzzles, and various other tasks to then gain access to different realm cards, different gear, and and aid in the progression of the game. Without visiting these points, you won't be able to progress. In the forest realm, for me, from my experience, is by far the easiest biome to access these sites of power. Some of the other realms, it's very difficult to, and we'll cover those a bit later. But just the key takeaway is that the sites of power are very easy to accessible in the forest realm, speeding up progression and just giving it an overall better experience for someone that's new to survival games or that doesn't want to muck around a ton. Outside that, it has everything you need, by far the easiest and safest realm to start your base in. Some other things to note about the forest realm is that you'll come across these forest spirit looking creatures called the Carnute. Now, in other realms, these are quite terrifying and difficult bosses to defeat, but in the forest advanced realm, all you can do is witness them pushing trees over and making trees regrow. It really is a forest spirit. It won't attack you and you can't attack it until later in the game when you can use a spell to make it solid and materialize. And when you are looking for some of the more rarer resources, all advanced realms have caves. A lot of these underground caves are stacked full of very useful and somewhat rarer resources, but caves are definitely less common in the forest realm. Also note that with the accompany of some of the rarer and better resources, it will also generally contain creatures. It could be bears, bugs, but generally you'll find some unique creatures that exist only within the caves within each of the biomes. And that leads us to the next realm we're going to visit, which is the desert realm. Desert realm has a lot more caves and a lot more of the rarer mid to late game resources that you need, but it also offers a much more intense scarcity of wood, which really does make it a more difficult biome to exist in because so much of the things you need to craft, build, and do will require wood. Now, I'm just going to quickly show you what it's like trying to chop down a tree in the desert realm. As you can see, it takes a substantial time with the early to mid-level gear that you'll get. Now, there are other trees that are much easier to chop down, but depending on your location, there's definitely less of them. And also note that once you chop down a tree, they're not going to regrow unless you're able to use a spell on it. That will come later in the game. However, there is a trick around this. The best and fastest way to get plentiful wood in the desert realm can be just harvesting all the wood on the ground. Now, from my testing, the wood on the ground will respawn. All you have to do is leave that location, come back, and it should respawn. I'm not exactly certain if it's time-based or just pushing it out of the render zone and then coming back, but that is by far the quickest way. Do not waste your time chopping down the huge trees in the desert realm because it will take a ton of time. What becomes super critical if you do pick the desert realm is that you really need to position your base somewhere most likely close to water, trees, rock faces, cliffs. For me, I found a perfect place near a point of interest between intersecting rock formations, which provide a lot of shade, and also all the resources for the most part are scattered surrounding the rock faces and escarpments. But being somewhere where there's water, trees, shade, and lots of resources will definitely help, particularly being near water where you'll find lots of plant fiber, because that can be something that can be a little bit tricky to find when you need vast amounts. The desert does become a bit more friendly, especially when you know how to get more wood. But where I really struggled with the desert realm is trying to access those critical points of interest called the sites of power. Now in the forest realm, they're really easy to get to, but so many of these sites of power in the desert realm are nested way up on the escarpment, and they're near impossible to get to. You will not have enough stamina, and from my understanding, the only real way to get to these points of interest is you need to get a certain miner card, which basically puts on low gravity for you so you can jump extra high. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I'll find it and put it on screen now. You will have to find these certain locations called transmuters. These are special points of interest that are stationed within each of the biomes where we can play the miner cards, which can influence the environment, summon creature, trigger events. But basically, this is just like another wild card that you can play to interact with the realm in the way you choose. And for me, as far as I'm aware, to access some of these points of interest will require using the transmuter and playing a certain card to be able to access some of these sites of power and points of interest. Now, it wasn't an earlier build, so this may have changed or will change in the future, but from as far as what I can see, this seems to be the case. And all this did for me was make me very confused and slow down my progression. But then again, I didn't have access to any good information being a trailblazer at the time. But something to keep in mind, when it comes to creatures in the desert realm, it can be a rather handy place to also collect your meat, bone, and chitin. Now, all of these will be very useful for food, crafting, and they're easy to collect because you'll find that the locusts really do swarm and are generally in packs of anywhere from 3 to 6, but it can get a little bit annoying because they are kind of everywhere, but you can easily outrun them if you have enough stamina. Now, for the most part, the rest of the creatures are somewhat passive, which does make dealing with the weather condition a little bit easier, because the desert will give you a hot debuff, and basically that's triggered anytime you're not in shade, and that will restrict your maximum stamina. Now, if you do pick this as your first biome, you're not going to have an umbrella straight away. You will be operating for the most part without your max stamina. However, you can use certain foods that are easier to get at the start. They like cooked meat, cooked berries will also help boost your stamina and help mitigate the sun debuff. But there are vast open spaces in the desert, so this can be a little bit trickier to navigate when you start out. And even when you do have your umbrella, you will need to switch to your two-handed weapons, which will then lower your stamina, which can be tricky if you are low on health and trying to get away from locusts. So the desert does certainly offer a bit more challenge to the initial experience when you first get in there. But this is where I would actually say someone who's more experienced at survival games that wants to progress quicker, in the sense that they'll be able to access better materials that will have a greater impact on improving their upgrades on their weapons and armor. And this is because of the parametric crafting system that's in Nightingale. And what this means simply is that there are multiple resources you can collect to craft the same gear and items. So you can find some of the more common lower grade resources and use them to craft, say, a jacket. Alternatively, you could go to the desert or swamp realm and mine certain materials that have much better properties but are the same. They'll have different names. For example, there might be like iron ore, copper ore, gold ore, silver ore, quartz, rare magical ores. But you gather some of those more rarer materials and use those to craft the same jacket. The stats and passives will be much better on the coat where you've used the more rarer resources. Now, that's a very high level way of explaining it, but it just gives you a good idea of how what you put into what you craft does equal a different outcome depending on what you use. And that's where a biome like the desert in some way could speed up the progression, because you will have access to a lot more of these higher value resources more readily available when compared to, say, the forest realm, which will means when you come to upgrading to your green gear level, you won't have to worry about jumping to another realm. You can just stay in your Bayen's Desert Realm and mine a lot of the material you'll need. Now, it's not to say the Forest Realm doesn't have them, it just has less and it can be harder to find, probably most likely in caves, depending on what it is. But the Desert Realm is rich in caves and resources, so it's a good place to do a lot of the mining for a lot of different things. And it does also contain some of the more rarer, very high level resources, but each biome will have elements of that anyway. So to summarize, the Desert Realm offers a much more of a unique and increased challenge when compared to the Forest Realm. You have to be much more picky about your location. It has to be a prime spot with all the things mentioned. You need to be a bit more experienced and consider your stamina and health a lot more when navigating the realm. This is definitely a few steps ahead of the Forest Realm, but a good place for your expert or well-versed player in the survival genres, offering a reasonable challenge at the start, but once you get moving and get all the gear up, it becomes a great place to make a home. My personal recommendation though is to stay away from the Desert Realm until you get a grasp of how the portals work and basically how Nightingale works, because you can end up like me, whereas my first time in the desert was an absolute tragic experience, not being able to find resources, building a base in a terrible spot, and just having a lot of trouble. But with guides like this will really help improve that condition for you. Now let's take a look at the swamp environment. Now the swamp environment is by far the hardest environment to exist in. It is for the most part poisonous water that will slow you down and give you a poison debuff that really eats into your health very quickly when compared to the other environmental conditions. It has quite advanced aggressive creatures that take a little bit more skill to deal with. The terrain is covered in rocks, some mountains, and obviously a lot of water. It does make it a bit trickier to build in the swamp area. However, the sites of power are much more easier to access when compared to the Desert Realm. Now, the main attraction for the Swamp Realm is that it has some of the best gear resources to craft your gear. So the benefit of picking the Swamp Realm won't be fully realized till you're trying to craft much more particular type of gear after, say, green, or you're on your purple, and you really want to make the very best version of the armor or clothing or item that you're after. This is where the Swamp Realm can be quite more plentiful in some of these more rarer resources. But do keep in mind, to get some of the really rare resources and essence, you will have to venture into other realms. So there will always be some limitations on the advanced realms. But the swamp, I would definitely say, would be the last choice to make it as your home base. It offers very little reward for the early to mid game, and exploring and accessing points of interest and sites of power, even if easier than the Desert Realm, it will offer definitely more challenge, slower pacing, because you are trying to traverse a lot of the terrain, which is definitely very rocky as well as full of water. And that water will cause disease, poison disease, whatever you want to call it, and that itself can present a lot of challenge, especially early game. It's also not the best sort of area to be building on because you are dealing with so many different elevations, rock formations, and water. You'll also have to combat some of the creatures which are a bit more advanced with their attacks and just takes a little bit more skill to handle. But over time, it becomes quite easy to handle them, but initially it can be quite a challenge. But one thing about the Swamp Realm is that I think it's one of the more beautiful realms to exist in my opinion. They're all fantastic, but the Swamp Realm is definitely something special. Now that sort of covers all the realms, but I did forget to mention the best place to build your first base in the Forest Realm is going to be somewhere more centralized to all the sites of power. And that's because you will find that these can be very challenging and you will die a ton, depending on your skill, of course. But if you're like me, you find yourself dying, getting taken to your respite, having to trek half a day just to get back there and die again and do the same thing over. So positioning yourself in the middle of the map or close to all the sites of power the best you can is a really good spot to pick, as well as somewhere that's also plentiful in trees, stone, rocks. And keep in mind that some of the best spots for mining all the different rocks, ore, and your rarer materials are definitely around a lot of the cliffs, but also around the edge of the map. I found some really good areas that have a lot of ore all around the edges of the map. There's something to keep in mind. So it's a bit of a tricky one to balance. So that's where I would be considering. But also note, there's this other trick you can do where you can just build another estate in front of any site of power so that when you die, you spawn right back in front of the site of power, and it saves a ton of time. That will give a lot of flexibility as well, but you can only have one estate set to your respite at a time. So once you do, you'll have to go back and change it back to your main base. But it definitely saved me a lot of travel time. And just on the travel time, even without quick travel, I actually really enjoyed having to trek everywhere because you move very fast and the maps are quite small. It wasn't really an issue for me. But anyway, went through a lot. This was way longer than I thought. I hope you got something out of it. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you later. Bye.